First of all, thanks very much for the presentations. I remember Chris Horan saying years ago in the context of research in Ireland that we've lots of interesting launches, but what we need is an admiralty. And I must say, looking at the evidence here, that's my sense. And I suppose my question to all speakers is really how do we scale up? So maybe just in Angela's context, like in terms of those with whom you deal, which I presume are some of the big food providers and the retail sector, how much penetration have you within that, and what potential is there to scale in that sector? Like I understand in France, they've introduced a zero tolerance on waste at certain retail level. Like, are we, is that completely different from the environment in Ireland? I suppose on the food and drink sector, we just heard that there's only 30 people signed up, 35 I think, to the food waste, and you have 150 members, and you also presumably IBAC have membership in the waste sector, and many of the others who aren't in the food processing, in that whole supply chain. If this is something that we're all recognise, we're on a rapid change, why that's so low a level of take-up, and would IBEC be supportive of what seems to be in the approach in Netherlands of a sort of a compact of the whole supply chain, not just the food processors, but looking up the supply chain to your primary producers and down the supply chain, through retail and into consumers, so that you start to get joined up initiatives. It seems to me it makes an enormous amount of sense, and we heard earlier that it's a win-win-win. Everyone wins from this. And just, I suppose, on the issue of the bioeconomy opportunity, I suppose it does. If we're to present this to farmers, in your view, can we now see a profitable pathway for farmers that in 5 or 10 years' time they can see this yielding profit? Are we still, in an uncertain environment with costs and barriers? Because that's the first question. And the second question is in relation to, is there any sustainability conflict in building this bio chain, in that, are you going to be using fertilizers to grow more grass that in turn, leaches out into the environment or whatever? Or is that balanced by the presumption of a lower herd, which, presumably washes away a lot of, okay, it's not the same emissions, but it does have other benefits. So just to see how far are we, again, it's the scaling issue. Can we scale this, or is it still, an interesting opportunity that's still a bit out on the horizon?
Thank you very much, Deputy Bruton. Who'd like to start? Ms. Rutledge.
Thank you, Deputy Bruton. In terms of penetration, so FoodCloud works with 186 food businesses in Ireland, and they'd be a mixture of multinationals down to the small craft trader. We work with all of the multiples in Ireland, so all of the retailers. So we would have good penetration in the retail sector. I think there is still opportunity in manufacturing and processing, and we would see a lot of opportunity in the area of agricultural recovery and the growers project that I mentioned in primary production.
Agricultural recovery doesn't go into those food waste stats we heard earlier.
No, it doesn't, exactly. Yeah, so it's not even measured properly, let alone being tackled. So we see that there's huge potential to scale up there. In terms of the elements required for the scale, it feels like everything is coming together now with the roadmap. We have the legislation on the horizon from the EU, but what it feels like we need is more resources. So more investment in the capacity of the redistribution sector, and more headcount essentially to make sure that we are sharing all of our knowledge.
And does that investment, does that come from the state, or does it come from the entire supply chain, sort of seeing the benefit distributed?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think it can come from both, but I think the state probably needs to lead on it. And then just in terms of the mandatory food donation law, and you mentioned France, so the mandatory food donation is an example of a policy lever that may have an impact on the amount of food that we can redistribute. It was introduced in France in 2016. There is some feedback from France around the quality of the food being donated at this stage, and also they have a crisis in relation to the number of volunteers that they can use to redistribute the food. So I think in terms of what we're doing here in Ireland, there is some work to be done in terms of investing in the capacity of the redistribution sector before we would look at mandatory donation. But I also think that there is an opportunity to share more knowledge about with food businesses and community partners around encouraging redistribution. I hope I've answered your questions. Thank you.
Mr. Kelly.
Higher numbers, it's something we've been encouraging with our members. We had the EPA in before our sustainability group late last year to actually give a detailed presentation on the food waste charter, and that was with the aim of obviously increasing the take-up. It's something we've been sort of putting out regularly to our members, and again, when we're reporting back to them after today's meeting, on today's meeting, I think one of the points we will be emphasising will be the
You have sort of a silo issue as well, like the waste isn't in the food, even though they're going to be collecting it. Is IBEC a bit siloed in that way for a circular strategy?
No, I don't think so. I mean, we obviously look at things both horizontally and we also look at them vertically from a sectoral perspective. But whilst we have a particular sectoral focus, we don't do that in isolation, and we do a lot of these things in conjunction, particularly with our colleagues in the retail sector, who obviously have representation within IBEC as well. But my colleague Kevin may want to add as well.
Yeah, just on the food waste charter. So we, as Paul mentioned, we had the EPA in front of our own FDI sustainability group, which is a group that we run and meet on a regular basis. And then also at the end of June, I believe, the EPA are actually running a food waste charter event. So we've shared that event with the members as well, and we expect on the back of that we'll be hoping to get more signatories to the charter as well. I would say probably from a food waste perspective, a lot of our members would be approaching it through Origin Green. So they would all have specific targets and specific actions on food waste through Origin Green. So it's trying to just couple the Origin Green up with the food waste charter now going forward.
Thank you very much. Just go to one question that I had myself. Sorry, did either, my apologies, Mr. Gaffney, did you want to contribute to that?
No, the previous question just on the bioeconomy.
Go right ahead, we've plenty of time.
So I suppose in terms of where we're at now, in terms of business models and actually farmers being able to take these up on their farm, when Helena and I would have kind of first started looking at this, we were always looking overseas at what people were doing in other countries in terms of putting infrastructure on the ground. So we would have to go over and see and bring ideas back home. We're now at a stage where government are starting to invest in, for example, demonstration projects which are in a practical setting, for example, working with Carberry farmers and others to actually demonstrate these technologies, to test business models, to test markets, working with them to show how products can work. So some of the things we're doing, for example, from grass is producing protein, and this is being tested as a replacement for soybean meal to try. We import a lot of soy, for example, so as a kind of Irish alternative. So we're definitely making a lot of progress in a kind of more scale setting, and the next stage will be to move it up to the commercial level. So I don't think we're too far away. And in terms of some of the business models that we've been looking at overseas, which would have been at the kind of demonstration scale that we're at now, they're now moving to commercial level. So I think there is definitely potential to do this in quite a short time frame. In terms of the sustainability issue of impacting and outscaling and things like this, I think it's case by case. It depends on how we implement it. Like if we do things in an unsustainable way, we're going to have unsustainable results. But what I would say is that in terms of the Irish interpretation of the bioeconomy and coming from Europe in terms of its bioeconomy strategy, there's a much more awareness now on the need to implement these circular bioeconomy ideas in a way that is within the ecological boundaries, so that we are taking into account and protecting against the adverse effects of scaling down some of these solutions. And that can happen in all ways. It can happen in terms of, as you said, increasing land production for feedstock and things like that, in terms of maybe integrating solutions which aren't really clean or aren't really green, in terms of products that aren't really resolving challenges. There's lots of ways which this can happen, but I suppose now through the integration of the bioeconomy within the circular economy, there is much more awareness of the need to guard against those impacts.